Hey, what's up everyone? In this video, we will learn how to add authentication and authorization to an ASP.NET Core web application, and we will use .NET Core version 5 and Razor pages to create our application. In this one, we will have a register page in which you will give email address, password and confirm password, and once the user is registered, we can then log them in using the email address and password they registered with. And once they are logged in, they'll see a different menu, and then they can see the home and privacy pages and all the other pages that you have authorized them to view. And you can see we also have the user identity name over here, and we also have implemented the logout functionality. So on clicking logout, they'll ask, are you sure you want to log out? And you can either click yes or no. If you click yes, you'll be logged out and redirected back to the login page. So it's a nice fun little application to implement identity and authentication inside an ASP.NET application. So without wasting any further time, let's get started. I have opened Visual Studio 2019 and I will click on create a new project. I have my filter selected as C#, all platforms and web, and I will click this option over here which is called ASP.NET Core web application, and it uses Razor pages. So I will click next. I will give it a location and name. And once I've given the name to the solution and the project, I'll click next. I will use .NET Core 5 as I have installed this one. If you have .NET 3, you can also follow this tutorial, but it is advisable to follow because this is the current .NET Core version. So please install .NET 5 and also update your Visual Studio so that it allows to use .NET 5. I will not choose any authentication over here because this is part of the tutorial. So I will choose none and click create. Our project has been created, so we will spin up the application to see what we get out of the box. We can see that we have a website which is of Razor pages, and we have two pages in here, a home page and a privacy page, and the theme for this is based on Bootstrap CSS, and the version that is being used at the moment out of the box is version 4.3. Let's go ahead and change that to the latest version of Bootstrap, which is version 5. Coming back to our application, we will go to the layout page and we will remove the references to the Bootstrap version 4, which is this one, and one at the bottom for the scripts, which is this one. We will remove that and we will mention the Bootstrap version 5. We'll go back to Bootstrap's website and you can see this is version 5, and we'll go to get started page and copy the CSS and paste it right below the link over here, just above the local style sheet for our website. And we will also copy the script tag, which is the bundle file over here, and we'll paste that right over here just above the site.js file. With those changes, we will go back to our website and refresh the page to see nothing changed, but now this is referencing Bootstrap version 5 and not 4.3. Now that we have our website ready, let's look at the steps of how we are going to approach this video tutorial over here. We will install Entity Framework Core, and we will follow the code first approach to create a database inside SQL Server so that ASP.NET Core can basically add our users and other authentication material inside those tables. The next would be the changes to the Startup.cs project to actually add authentication, and we will do migrations, the Entity Framework Core migrations in between these two steps, and we will go and see how the database looks like. We will create and implement the register page after we have added the authentication to our application. We will create and implement the login page for the registered user so that the user will be able to log in, and we will be able to see or we will be able to redirect the user to a different page from there. We will change the navigation menu in the layout file so that we could only see the login and register buttons and nothing else in the navigation menu. And once the user has been able to log in, we will be able to see the logout button as well. and after that we will add authorization in the home and privacy page, so that users are redirected to the login page if they are not logged in, and only if they are logged in will they be able to see the home and privacy page. And at last we will also create and implement the logout functionality. So once the user is logged in, we will have them visit a button and then from there ask if they really want to log out or not, and if they say yes, we will redirect them back to the home page. If you want to skip ahead to a certain topic, you can do that by clicking on the chapters defined below and also defined in the description box of the YouTube video. Alright, let's move on to our first step and install Entity Framework Core. We will go to dependencies, right click on that and go to manage NuGet packages. In the browse section, we will search for two packages one by one. We will search for this one first, which is Microsoft.Entityframeworkcore.SqlServer, and I will have the description of these two packages in the video description below as well. I will click on the latest version and install. You can see from the output window that this has been installed. We will go on to the next one. And choose Entityframework.Tools. This is used for entity framework migrations, so that when we run the script, this will actually create a database and inside our SQL Server database. So with that clicked, I will click on install. The second package has installed successfully as well. We will close that and add a connection to our database. We will go to the app settings, and just after this I will create the connection strings property and add a connection string for our new authentication database. I will create the name of auth connection string, and the property of this would be a server, which is dot, because I have installed SQL Server by that name. The database would be, let's say, ASP.NET Auth demo, or just auth, ASP.NET Auth, and then we will also have a trusted connection equal to true. With that in place, let's go on to the startup file and add our connection to the entity framework, and we also need a DB context for it. So let's create an app DB context first. I will right click on the project, add new folder. I will call this model, and inside the model I will also create another class file called auth DB context. This will inherit from identity DB context, and when I do a control dot on it, it basically comes from this package called Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core. So I will say install package. Now that our package is installed, we will create a constructor over here, and inside that we will have the DB context options. This comes from Microsoft.Entityframeworkcore, and this will be of type auth DB context, and I will pass this to the base class. And that's it. We will now go back to our startup file, and under the configure services method, we will add services dot add DB context pool, or DB context, and this will be auth DB context. And to this method, it takes an options, and we will say options dot use SQL Server. Press control dot to import it is from Microsoft.Entityframeworkcore, and this takes a connection string, as you can see, a string connection string. So we will use the connection string that we defined in the app settings.json, and we will use this object, the configuration, to get connection string, and we will mention the name of the connection string, which was auth connection string. So we will specify that here. I think I'm missing one bracket like that, and that's it. To enable authentication to our web application, we will initialize the code in the configure method, and we will come over here and say app.useAuthentication. And then in the configure services method, to use the database and the adding identity together, we will say services.addIdentity, and this will be this will take two parameters. One is t user, which is identity user. We will press control dot to import this from Microsoft ASP.NET Core identity, and we will say comma t role, which will be identity role. And then we will bind this to the entity framework store that we have, and that is of type auth db context, and close that. Next, we need to create a migration. Now we will go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Package Manager Console, and we will use Entity Frameworks tool to create migration. So we will write add-migration and give it any name, but for this one I will give AddAuthentication and click enter. Our add migration command has successfully completed, and it has created a migrations folder over here. This is basically a representation of our database and tables. So now to execute this and basically install or create tables inside and the database inside our SQL Server, we will use this command called update database and click enter. The update database command has successfully finished as well, and this should have created a database and tables for our ASP.NET identity inside SQL Server. So to view that, we will go to View, Server Explorer, and create a connection over here. We will add a connection with the server name called dot and choose the database. Our database was called ASP.NET Auth. We will click OK. So we can see that the database has been created. So let's see if the tables have been created or not. I will expand on that, tables, and as you can see, Entity Framework Core and ASP.NET Identity has created these tables inside our database. Our migrations have successfully completed, and now it's time to implement identity and implement the register page and the login page so that we can use the Microsoft Core identity to basically register a user that comes to our website. So we will go to pages and right click on here and add a new razor page. We will call this register. We will create a view model folder over here. And inside the view models folder, we will create a view model class called register. This is basically the model class which we'll use to represent the inputs on the screen. So we would need three things: the email field, the password field, and the confirm password field. So let's create these three properties. So we need an email password and confirm password, and we will decorate these with some data annotation. So email would be a required field, so I will say required, press control dot, and we will import system.componentModel.data annotations, and along with that I will also mention the data type for this one to be data type dot email address. I will mention the same required attribute for the password. For this one I will mention the data type as data type dot password, and I will copy these two for the confirm password field as well, and along with that I will also compare this to the other property, which is the password, and I will have an error message which says password and confirmation password did not match. Alright, with that in place, we will go back to our register.cs.html page and the actual class file, and we will have a public property inside here so that we can represent our model. I will import this from the view models directory and we'll call it register model. I don't need anything on the onGet method. I can't name it register model because it conflicts with this one, so I will just call it model. And I will go back to my cs.html file and style the page and add elements to the page as well. So because we are using Bootstrap 5, I will use Bootstrap classes. I will use the container class first and add a top margin, so margin top of 5. Inside that we will create another div and give this a class of row, and then justify content center and also align item center. Because this is a flex box and we are using flex box properties, this will basically align everything horizontally and vertically. We will create another div inside that and have a class which has a call sm of 12, so all 12 columns for the small screens, call md12, so all 12 columns for the md screens, and call lg4. So in a desktop it will be horizontally in the center. Inside that we will create an h1 tag which will say register, and we will give this a margin bottom of 3. We will now create a form tag and remove the action attribute from here. And inside the form we will have a div for the validation summary. So any errors that come out of the model state will be caught here and represented here. We'll give this a class of text danger. Next we will create 3 divs for our 3 input elements. I will give them a class of mb3 margin bottom 3, and we'll have a label inside that which will be of class form label, and this is ASP for, so this is for the form from the model, this is for email, and you can mention the name of the label, the value for the label, email address, and then I'll also create an input element of type text, and this will be ASP for the same model.email, and the class for this one would be form control. I will also add another span for the validation failure. So ASP validation for model.email, and we'll give this a class of text danger. So I'll copy this div and we'll paste it 2 more times for our password and confirm password. And similarly for confirm password. Now that that's ready, we will create one last div for our submit button. We'll give this a class of MB3 and have a button of type submit. And the name of the button would be register, and this will have the class of button and button primary. These are all Bootstrap classes, and yeah, it's very easy to implement. So now that we have the register page ready, let's go and spin our application up to see how this looks like. I have my application opened. I will go ahead in the URL and type register to open the register page. And as you can see, we have the email address, we have the password, and we have the confirm password screen with the submit button. And this is all looking very pretty because of the Bootstrap classes we have used. Let's go on and implement the onPost property of the register method, register page. So back to Visual Studio, and on the register.cs html.cs file, we will create a constructor first. We will move this up, and to the register model we will basically inject this constructor with 2 properties. One is the user manager, control dot on that, and import ASP.NET Core.Identity, and this takes a type, and the type that of our user is identity user, and call this user manager. And another one which is sign in manager, this takes a type of identity user as well, and we'll call this sign in manager, and basically assign and create these fields. So control dot and create and assign this property. So we have 2 properties that we can use in the onPost method. So let's create the method for that. So public void for now, and onPost, I will call this onPost async. We will implement the async functions. And first of all, we will check if our model is valid. So if model state dot is valid, do stuff, otherwise just come outside and return the page. And to implement the return functionality, I'll also implement a task of iAction result, and if the model state is successful, we will create a new user. So var user is equal to new identity user, and this takes a lot of properties, but the ones that we are interested in is username, which will be model.email, and we'll also give the email, which will be again model.email. We will have this object ready, and we will use the user manager, which is over here, the user manager, and it has a function, an inbuilt function provided to us by ASP.NET Core identity package, which is create async, and this takes uploads. So it takes an identity user object which we have over here, and the second property it takes is a password which we got from the model. So model.password and that. So we will await on that because this is an async method, and we will get the result. So we will check if the result dot has succeeded. That means our registration process was successful and our user has been created. We will sign in the user. So we will use this sign in manager, and we will say sign in manager dot sign in async. That's an async method as well, and it takes a few things. One is the user, so we will pass in the same user from here, and the next thing is persistent. We'll say false for now, and being an async method we will use the await keyword and use this. So once this has signed in, this is a task, so nothing is returned back. Once this is signed in successfully, we will return to the home page, which is redirect to page, and we have an index page over here, so we will redirect it to the home page, which is also called the index page in our case. And in case this is not succeeded, so we have any errors in here, we will loop this and we will use the errors in the result. So result dot errors, and we will add the errors to the model state dot add model error dot description. So we will add all the errors in the model state so that it goes back and shows it to the page. So now we have this ready. Let's go on and see if this is working or not. Spin up the application. We are on the register page, so we will give an email address. So let's say samir1@mailinator.com. I will give it a password, and we'll change this from text to being a password field. So let's do that now. Back to our code, and on the register page, instead of type equal to text, we'll say type equal to password, and the same for confirm password as well. Refresh the page again, and samir1@mailinator.com as our email address, and password at 123 and password at 123, just to be a successful registration. I will click on the register button, and hopefully this should bring us back to the home page, and it fails. Let's see what the error is. I think the issue is that we are using the model property in our view over here, but we are not really binding this using the bind property attribute. So I'll mention this as bind property. So now the values coming back from the model over here will be passed on to the identity user over here. So with that change, let's go back to our application and click refresh. We will give the email address passwords again, and click on register. And as you can see now, it has registered us successfully and has redirected us back to the home page. Let's go on to Visual Studio and see if we are able to view this inside our SQL Server. So in our connected database, I will right click on the ASP.NET users show table, As you can see, our user has been successfully created, and we can see the username as samir1@mailinator.com and the email as the same because we gave it like that. So our registration works now. So let's move on to basically fixing our layout page so that we can easily know if we are logged in or not. So let's go to Pages and Layout, and we can see we have two menus over here, one for homepage, one for privacy. We basically want to check if the user is signed in or not. So to do that, we will have to inject a service over here, and before that we will import a package. So we will say using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Identity, and we will now inject a service. So we will inject the service, the sign-in manager, SIGN sign-in manager, which is of type identity user, and then we will call this sign-in manager. Now we will use the sign-in manager to basically check before this UL starts. We will write in some code over here. We will see if sign-in manager says if this user has been signed in, and only if this user is signed in, and this takes a user principal. So we will mention user over here, and yeah, after that we will say only if the user is signed in, we will show the home and privacy pages. So I've removed the UL from there and put it in the code block over here. I will format this, and otherwise I will also add an else column over here, and otherwise I want to create a nav bar. So a UL tag, and inside the UL tag I will have an LI which will have an anchor link, and this goes to ASP page login. So if the user is not logged in, they should be able to see two buttons, login and register. So this is for the login page, and I will give this some classes. So this will be a button and a button primary, and similarly for the second LI, this will be called register, and this will go to the register page. I will remove the primary class from here, and we will have to also give classes to the UL so that it looks nice in the navbar. So I will give the UL class, the UL element, a class of navbar nav, and will display this as a flex. So dflex, justify the content to be in the end, because this is the login and register button. We want the buttons over here at the end for a desktop, and we will have the flex grow property to be 1 so that it occupies the complete space if there's no other nav. Yeah, and for the LIs we will have the class of nav item, and the same for the register button as well. For some reason the formatting didn't work right and it removed the names of my anchor tags. So I will remove this curly braces over here and move the if statement right over here, and if that else this, I don't need an extra bracket over here. Now I'll add the home value and the privacy value to my anchor tags, and I need another button for the logout. So I'll say logout, and it goes to the logout page later on when we implement that, and this will be of button primary. Yeah, and basically I can do that, or I can add another UL and push the logout button straight to the end, to the right hand side over here. So I need another UL like this one, and can remove both of these, cut the logout from here, paste it here. I don't want this to grow because I have the original UL to grow, so this just pushes that right to the end, and hopefully this all works right. And I'll format this quickly, spin up the application to see, refresh the page, and now our logout button has been pushed to the side till the container. So that's looking good. It feels like our user has been logged in, so that because we can see the logout button. Yeah, and once the user logs out, we should be able to see the login and the register buttons and not the home and privacy anymore. So let's implement the login page now, because we still haven't done that. Coming back to the pages, right click, add eraser page. We will create a login.cs HTML, and once that has been done, we will create another view model. So right click on the view model, add a class called login, and inside that we will have 3 properties, one for the email, which is a string. We will have another property for the password, again of type string, and another one for remember me, which will be of type boolean. And we will annotate our properties with the required attribute, control dot, and import the packages. So we'll have the required attribute for the email and the password, and we'll have data types. Email address, and similarly for password, and we will leave the remember me as it is. We will come back to our login.cshtml.cs, which is over here, and we will basically have a property for this model. Import this from the view models directly, create the name as model, and like last time, we'll not forget to bind this to annotate this to the bind property, so that we get the communication from the HTML page as well back to our CS class. Now we'll go ahead and create the login page, the elements on the HTML file. We'll start by creating a div with a class for container and margin top of 5. We will create another class, another div element with a class of row, justify content to be center, and align items to be center as well, just because this is a flexbox. We will create another div with a class of column, so call sm12, call md12, call lg4, so a 4 width wide column for desktops. Inside that, we will create an h1 tag for the login header, and give this a class of margin bottom 3. We will now create a form, remove the action from there, and then create 3 divs inside it. So the first one would be having a class of mb3, then a label inside it with a class of form label, and then the label text to be email address. The ASP for this is for the model property email. We will then create an input button, input element of type text, ASP for model.email, and class is form control. We will copy this, or we will also have a span which will be an ASP for validation for model.email. And a class of text danger. We will now copy this div 2 more times, at least one more time first, to change this to a password. And we will have one more for the input checkbox. So we will create a div class of MB3 margin bottom, and then we will have an input type of checkbox. The ASP for would be model.rememberme, and the class would be form check input. And then we'll create a label, and we will have the class for the label to be called a form check label. The ASP for would be model.rememberme, and then the text would be remember me with a question mark. So this will be a checkbox, so the users can take yes or no. And the div for this one will have another class called form check, so that it aligns everything nicely in a single line. Another one, which is the last one, for the submit button would be a div of class MB3. This will have a button of type submit, and the name of the button would be login. We'll give classes button and button primary. Alright, with that up, let's go back to our application again, refresh it, and use the URL to navigate to login page. And we can see that the login form looks nice. We have the checkbox and the elements as well. Let's implement the login functionality. So going back to the CS.html, we will implement the onPost method. So void for now onPost async, and we will also use the return URL, because if there's a return URL, we basically want to redirect the user back to the return URL. So we'll say string return URL is equal to null, and then we'll check if the model state is valid. Then we basically want to call the sign-in manager, but for that we have to inject that in the constructor. We will call the sign-in manager, control dot import stuff, and then pass the identity user type, and then call this sign-in manager. We basically want to call the sign-in manager to use its function. We want to assign and create an assign property. So we want to use this one to call the method password sign in async, which requires a user object a password, or the second one uses a username. We have the username, so we will pass in the model.email, which is our username, model.password. The next one is persistent, that we wanted to check if the user needs to be remembered, so we will say model.rememberme. And lockout on failure, we'll just mention this as false. And because this is async, we will use the await keyword and also change our method to be an async method, and use a task of iAction result. We will store this in a result, and we will check if the result got succeeded. That means the user is able to log in, so that password and username was correct. We will check inside this if the request has a return URL or it doesn't have a return URL, or return URL is an empty thing or a home page. Then return redirect to page, and let's redirect the user back to the index page. Otherwise, if the user got a return URL, redirect the user back to the return URL. And if this wasn't successful, we will add the error to the model state, dot add model error. We will say username or password incorrect. Close that, and we will return the page back. Let's see if that works. So spin up the application again and refresh the website. We are on the login page, so I'll spin up the website again. Refresh the page. We are on the login page. We already have a user created, so let's go on and try to register, log in with that user. And we have to change this to a type of password, so let's do that first. The type of this one should be a password field. Going back, refreshing the page. I know we can see that this user is registered, but even then they should be able to navigate us back to the home page on a successful login. So I'll mention the password and click on login, and you can see it has redirected us back to the home page on a successful login. So our login works fine here as well. So now it's time to implement the logout functionality so that we can clearly see if we are able to log out from here or not. So we will create a page over here called logout. And to this page we will have some HTML over here. We will create a form, remove the action method over here, and in this form we will basically ask the user, do they really want to log out or not. So we will have a div, a class of container, and margin top of 5, another div inside that with the class of row and justify content to be in the center, another div for the column, call sm12, call md12, and call lg4. We will then create a paragraph asking the user if they want to log out. And then after that paragraph we'll create another paragraph with 2 buttons in it. The one would be yes and the another one would be no. For the first one, I will give it a primary class. So button primary, and then I will also define, because these are two buttons and only one form, I will create an ASP page handler. So ASP page handler, this to be called logout, because they're saying yes, I want to log out. I will give the classes to the next button. So button light, and then margin left of 5 to separate these two buttons, and a border of dark. And then I will give this one an ASP page handler of don't log out, because the user has selected no. So now I will come to the CS file of this one and implement the post methods. Over here I will create a constructor and will basically inject the sign in manager, and this takes a type of identity user. I will create and assign this property, and now I can use this. So I will create a public async task of iAction result. We'll call this method on post logout async, and this is when the user has selected yes, so the logout page handler comes here, and I will basically use the sign in manager to call the logout function. So sign out async, and because this is an async function, I will use await. Once the user has been signed out, so ASP.NET Core will handle all the sign out functionality for us and will delete the cookie. And once the user has been signed out, I will return the user to the home page, or let's say the login page, because that's the correct way to do it. So redirect to page and mention the login page over here. We will copy this function and paste it over here and change this to be called post on post don't logout, so that the other handler works. We basically, because the user has said we don't want to log out, we'll just take them back to the index page. Yeah, and this doesn't need an async method, because there's nothing for us to use an async function. So on post logout and on post don't logout has been implemented. Let's spin up the application and see if this is working or not. Refresh the browser. It looks like the user is logged in, so it's a good opportunity to test the logout button. I will click on logout. It goes to the logout page and ask the user, are you sure you want to log out? If the user selects no, they will be redirected back to the home page. If the user selects yes, they are logged out. You can't see the logout button and the home page and privacy page anymore, and you see the login and the register pages. So the logout functionality works fine. Now we have to also see one more thing, that even though we can't see the index and the privacy page, we can still access that. But if the user wanted to go to the privacy page, this is still accessible, although the navs are not visible. But we can restrict that functionality by using the authorize attribute. So let's go back to our application, and let's say we want to restrict the view of the pages index or just the privacy page for now, just to show that it works. So we'll go to the class file and decorate this class with the authorize attribute. Import this from ASP.NET Core authorization, and once we have that, the user will no longer be able to see the privacy page if they are not logged in. So let's go back, spin up our application again. And if the user wanted to click on the privacy page, we can see that it's going to account login, because we still ASP.NET Core thinks that this is the path to our login page, whereas the path is just the login. So let's go back to the settings, to the Startup.cs, and change that bit. So on the services section, on the configure services, we'll call the services and we will configure the application cookie, and this takes a config. So we will say config dot, and we can change the login path here and the cookie name and other stuff. So let's change the login path to be at this location, because our page is directly under the solution, under this path. So now if somebody tries to visit the privacy page, so let's go back to the application and just visit the home page again to see the user is not logged in. If somebody tries to visit the privacy page, they are redirected back to the login page with the return URL. So once the user enters the login name and password, they should be able to redirect to the privacy page, and here it is. So the user has been redirected from the login page to the privacy page, because they were redirected back from there because they were not logged in. So now our application is all complete, and the login, register and logout functionalities are working as expected. I hope you liked the video. If you did, press the like button, subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss my next video. See you all in the next one.